Some of you might have noticed on the top that it says live on YouTube, and we decided that these evening Dharma reflections over the next tonight and the next 2 nights, that we'll put them on YouTube live stream, just so anybody else in the community that wants to join us for this hour. But here in the Zoom room will be just those of us on the retreat together. So we'll begin tonight with a little practice of reflection or contemplation. And you could just sit comfortably. It's sort of a nice blending of getting some information, but mostly using the information to reflect on our own heart. And it reminded me, as I was thinking about how we might begin tonight together, of a story that Joseph Goldstein tells about his time practicing with Sayadaw U Pandita in Burma. And I guess Joseph was struggling a little bit during that long retreat at this particular time. And so Sayadaw, this pretty fierce and respected teacher, suggested that Joseph reflect on his sila, on his ethical conduct. And, as many of us probably might think, if we got an instruction like that from our teacher, Joseph immediately thought of, I must be bad. I should think about all the bad stuff I've done, have remorse. But what actually his teacher was suggesting is, like, when life is rough, when our experience is difficult and hard to bear, we actually have something we can call on. And it's this force of goodness or force of purity, what we sometimes call the parami or even the basis of merit. I think I mentioned that last night. The 3 bases of merit being generosity and sila, this capacity to orient around non-harming and to refrain from harming, and cultivating a wise, stable heart, samadhi, and wisdom. So for this next 15 minutes or so, we're just going to sit. You can close your eyes if you'd like, but just sit comfortably. And we're not looking for anything that's not right here in the heart, in the mind. But just that we're on this retreat together as we are. We're listening in on live stream, whatever it might be. But in any case, it's a really wholesome thing to be doing on a Monday night. To be sitting, to have in our heart this inclination to be interested in our heart, interested in our life, interested in becoming a wiser, kinder human being. So we just want to appreciate that that's alive in our heart right now. The intention to take care of ourselves and take care of the world by doing this kind of training that we're doing on the retreat or with our practice. So again, we're just, in a direct, immediate way, we're acknowledging that what we're up to right now is wholesome, and that it's already having a healing, wholesome effect, leaving a wholesome impression on the heart, on the mind, setting good things in motion down the road. In the same way, if we were causing trouble, stealing, taking something that wasn't ours, we could, if we had the inclination, we could feel directly that what we're doing wasn't wholesome, wasn't helpful, was leaving an unwholesome impression in our heart that we can directly feel, sense. So I'm just going to go through the list of the 10 qualities that are usually listed as paramis, or in a way they can become a kind of superpower when they build momentum. And the first is dana, this word for generosity, this capacity to be content with what we have. Like we can be content right now to be sitting here, content with the temperature in the room, content with the clothes on the body, content with this heart and mind as it is right now. And feeling this generosity of the heart. And feeling the purity, sensing into the purity of our actions. We're not harming anybody now. We're not taking anything that isn't ours. Our way of being right now is quite wholesome in terms of our ethical conduct. And just to sense that. And for a time now, not strategizing to get or to become, we can renounce anything that we might be seeking, anybody we might be trying to become. At least right now, we can put all that down. So this is the superpower of renunciation, not needing the moment to be different than it is. Not needing, so sense into the not needing to become anybody. Doesn't mean we won't become somebody or things won't change. They will, of course, but how wholesome it is to sense this capacity we all have to renounce any becoming, any need to become somebody, to become somewhere, some way rather. And sensing into our superpower of wisdom, this capacity we have to attune to the way an awakened person relates, seeing the changing nature of thought, the changing nature of sensation and sound. This day of retreating together has flowed along like a river, no stopping point anywhere. Not really worthy of grasping, not worthy of any kind of clinging. You sense the wisdom of dispassion, the wisdom of non-attachment. And just to whatever degree the heart is aligned, is trusting this perspective of the awakened ones. As the Buddha says, nothing whatsoever should be clung to as I, me, or mine. And the next parami is energy, just the brightness, joyful interest, the inner light in our heart, the wakefulness that's already here, not somebody needing to make effort to be energized. The energy is already here. And just for a moment, sense and appreciate the energy that's here and now. And the superpower of patience and steadfastness. Patience really arises from this powerful wisdom that understands that whatever is relevant is here and now. I don't need this moment to change. I don't need to go anywhere. Whatever real work, real awakening needs to happen, it's here and now. So I can be resolute, I can be steadfast and patient with what's right here, right now. We can take a few moments and reflect on truthfulness, our love for truthfulness, our respect for honesty, commitment to aligning with the truth of things as best we can. And just feel that power, the goodness of aligning with wanting to see the truth, wanting to understand the truth of things. And we have metta, loving kindness, as a superpower. So we take a few moments and just reflect on our heart's capacity to attune with kindness and compassion and love, a generous and unconditioned love, freely given to ourselves in all directions outward. Really feel the power of knowing how to be here and now without any aversion or fear. This is what love feels like. It's the absence of any fear and aversion. And the last of the paramis is equanimity. This beautiful and resonant balance. Not being pushed around by what comes and goes. And as many of you know, equanimity is a kind of love. In the sense that it allows the heart to be intimate, allows the heart to include all the ups and downs without losing sensitivity, without disturbing the intimacy with the conditions, with the way it is. So it's not a distant balance, it's an intimate balance. So we're going to take a couple more minutes of silence and just use your own intuition. Don't worry about this list that we just went through. Just see if you can tune in to the force of goodness in your life that's apparent here and now. All the moments of patience, moments of kindness, moments of restraint, all these wholesome moments create some momentum, a momentum of goodness. Can we sense its presence? And we're not denying that there might be forces of greed or forces of delusion, forces of hatred in our hearts. But for another minute or so, we're choosing to notice what is good. And take a moment if you need and adjust the body. I'm going to encourage myself, I encourage all of us, especially if you have some time during these 4 days where you feel like you're struggling, just find a place to sit or walk. You could do it while walking, and contemplate the goodness that you can sense in your heart. And you might have to delve into some memories, actually, where you remember a time where you really were generous, or you remember a time where you practiced a lot of restraint or a lot of resolve, a lot of patience. There's a lot of natural, beautiful kindness, a lot of clarity and wisdom, a lot of good energy, brightness. And then link that to, like, whatever that was 2 years ago, 1 week ago, that has roots, right? Just like I mentioned about karma last night. I'll talk a little bit more about it tonight, but this is the real foundation of the Buddhist teachings, and it's not unique to the Buddha. People have recognized that we live in a conditional, lawful universe, and that everything matters because everything is conditioning what comes next. How my mind is relating right now is a factor in what gets set in motion and what arises for me in the next moment. Interdependent in this way. Doesn't matter whether I believe that or want that to be true. When we look carefully, we see that this lawfulness of karma, actions done with intention, thoughts thought with intention, words spoken with intention, leave an impression. If you plant an acorn, you get an oak tree, right? If you relate this way, there's a particular kind of impression that gets left in the mind stream. If I'm acting out with a lot of greed, that's the particular impression that gets laid down, and it affects the next moment of my mind, and then the next and the next. This isn't something to believe. This is something we can, and we each of us, we should check it out. And as I mentioned briefly last night, this, we know it's sinking in a useful way when this deepening understanding of karma is felt as empowering. Because then the heart, the mind senses, oh, I can take care of myself in a deep way now. I'm not helpless. Because I've realized by paying attention that how the mind is relating affects how everything unfolds. So there's a way for me to learn how to participate in the present moment. So keep that in mind, that the teaching on karma is meant to be empowering for human beings. Because it's really, the way that it's become part of popular culture, the word and the concept, it's really not that in line with the teachings in Buddhism. It's become this sort of, well, that's your karma kind of thing, like predestination or something like that. Karma as a teaching, as an instruction, really helps us learn how to show up to the present moment. It's not really that useful in terms of, except if you want to beat yourself up or judge other people, sort of thinking about like what happened in the past. If you want to know what happened in the past, you can have a sense by noticing how it is right now, because this, the way it is for me right now, is somehow linked to the past. My mind, the way it is right now, my body, the way it is right now, this world, the way it is right now, it couldn't be this way except by being conditioned by what was past. So that way we get a sense, like this is, when the past was the way that it was, you get a now that's like this, right? So that's how we really need to know about the past. It set this in motion. This is the fruit of everything past. And that hopefully, if it's held skillfully, then it makes us curious. Okay, so if everything past led up to this being how it is right now, what should I do with the now? How should I relate? How can I relate? How can I start to take responsibility for what's getting set in motion instead of giving up or thinking that I have no power? And so this theme for the retreat, looking at especially the paramis of generosity and sila, this capacity to keep ourselves from harming others because we care. And the third of the three paramis we're looking at for this retreat is bhavana, which usually gets translated as cultivating the stability of awareness, the continuity of present moment awareness, and cultivating a heart that's wise. So it's really cultivating the heart in these two ways that relate to each other quite well: samadhi, concentration, and insight and wisdom. And they're really working together. And together we call that cultivating, a wise and stable heart, a wise and stable mind. And they're really, I wasn't kidding. I think it's helpful, especially these days where there's, I don't know why, but so much interest in superheroes. And, we're just so impressed with people who have so many movies and books about people who have this sort of hyper competence, whatever it might be. They're a super artist, or they're a super spy, or they're a super this or a super that. But we really do have the capacity to develop any of these paramis, these beautiful qualities of the heart. Once we learn cause and effect, like how does the heart build momentum around kindness, or how does the heart build momentum around generosity or wisdom or resoluteness or energy or patience or equanimity, any of these 10. I mean, you could probably come up with any numbered list, and we'd all basically agree on like what are the beautiful, wholesome qualities of the heart. But because it isn't like, oh, I'm just destined not to have a lot of generosity in my heart. I'm just a stingy person. I'm just a person that doesn't have much clarity in my mind. I'm just a deluded person. We have these stories, and in a way they can become self-fulfilling. And so the teaching on karma is really saying that whatever particular package you have in your personality, that package, those particular wholesome and unwholesome qualities, they arose lawfully, conditionally, right? And so as you're relating and the way you're showing up to your life, you can grow wholesome and unwholesome qualities. So I wonder which ones we want to grow. And that question is actually very real, because a lot of the times we're growing qualities that if we did have some perspective, we'd go, I don't want that quality to get stronger in my heart. I don't want to become a more irritated person down the road. I don't want to be better at irritation, stronger at irritation, more powerful at being an irritated human being. That's not the superpower I want. I really want the superpower of equanimity, the sort of unshakable balance, even while being intimate with the ups and downs. I really want the superpower of generosity, or the superpower of clarity, seeing things as they are. And being on retreat, for those of you who are on retreat, this is really a perfect time to look at the cause and effect, the conditional, lawful nature of the world. In the world, the wider world is just expressing the cumulative karma of all of our hearts. So if we want to really affect the world, well, we can definitely affect the world by taking responsibility for the qualities in our own mind and which qualities we're growing and which qualities we're weakening. Simply by how we pay attention, what we're noticing, and the way we're relating to what we're noticing. That's how we grow things. Some of you maybe studied the hindrances. It's one of the common topics, especially when we're on retreat. And usually a teacher at some point in the retreat will give a talk on the 5 hindrances. What is it when we're sitting and walking and just living our life? What is it that haunts us and disturbs the mind, weakens the stability of awareness, colors the mind so we can't see clearly? Well, there's the wanting mind, wanting something to happen. There's the aversive mind, wanting something to go away. There's the sleepy mind, the dull mind, the restless, anxious mind, and the doubtful mind. These are the 5 hindrances. And when the Buddha taught about the 5 hindrances, he used this really simple kind of teaching system about feeding and starving. How do we feed the hindrances? In what way do we feed the wanting mind? Well, if we have something, maybe it happened to you today, around food, around sex, around sleep, around some kind of pleasant experience, wanting to read the news or whatever it might have been, and you noticed it, and then you might, just hanging out with the mind that wants something, you can actually learn. Oh, if I really wanted to, I'm trying not to, while on retreat, even though I'm teaching the retreat, I'm trying to really limit and avoid using my cell phone or computer to read the news, just trying to keep things simple during this time. But because I do usually read the news, I'm attracted, like, did anything happen? So I'm attracted to go there. And so if I pay attention to my thoughts about what might be happening out there in the world, well, then the greed, the wanting grows because I'm feeding it by imagining and speculating, right? And if instead, there's any number of things I could bring to mind when there's that wanting, like, well, if it isn't one thing, it's another. Like just bringing to mind how news never ends. There's no end to the news. And it's really just kind of a regurgitation of stuff happening. And that the dependence on the news is painful. So I could bring those things to mind. And that might begin to starve that tendency to want to read the news. But basically, each of us have to figure it out, discover it for ourselves. When we notice the mind is getting entangled in some way, just to be curious about in what ways can my mind feed this entanglement, this hindrance? In what ways can my mind, can wisdom starve and weaken this tendency to be wanting, to be aversive, to be sleepy, to be restless, to be full of doubt? Because we want to, basically, we tell ourselves a lie. Oh, let me just read the news and then the wanting will go away. Well, it does sort of temporarily go away when I'm there engrossed in the news. I'm not usually consumed with wanting to read the news, but it deepens the groove in the mind, doesn't it? So we get more kind of caught in that pattern and more inclined to feed the beast. to feed the hungry ghost that never gets enough news, never gets enough chocolate, never gets enough entertainment, never gets enough sleep. So this is part of the developing this parami of bhavana, cultivating the heart, samadhi, and insight, this superpower of wisdom, superpower of samadhi, is learning to take responsibility for what we feed and what we starve. And it's not about, it's very easy for us to judge ourselves when we go read the news anyway, or go eat more food anyway, or go, act out in some way anyway. But what wisdom understands is it never makes sense to give up, because these tendencies to be greedy, to be aversive, to be dull, to be restless, to be full of doubt, they're very impersonal, but they will never let up, because it's a feedback loop. So the more we feed the wanting beast, the more we become a wanting beast. The more we feed the irritable, hateful, aversive, fearful beast, the more fearful, irritated, hateful we become. The more we indulge in sleepiness and dullness, the more that becomes the tendency of the mind. The more that we whip up restlessness by worrying and having remorse and sort of feeding the restlessness and identifying with it, the more that becomes the tendency of the mind. And same with doubt. So the Buddha had as some of you know, a very provocative image for how the hindrances work in the mind. And the image he used are these encircling vines. We see them, I noticed them. I was out at Prairie Farm, Common Grounds retreat property for 5 weeks, and on retreat for the last 2.5 weeks or so. And but I got in the woods almost every day, just not so much even on the trails, just sort of moving through the woods. There are 46 acres out there, and a lot of topography up and down hills. And just walking around and seeing some of those. I don't know if they were the Virginia creeper, but one of those vines, and some of them were quite thick, 4 inches in diameter, and they go up the tree, and take over the canopy of the tree and can really snuff out the tree eventually. Well, in the tropics, they have these vines that are even more aggressive. And, it will begin with just a tiny seed, the bird eating the fruit of some little vine, and then pooping on the limb of a big tree. And these vines have a capacity to start growing, especially in the tropics, right there on the limb of a big tree. And eventually, after starting to grow, they'll drop a vine 20, 30, many more feet down to the ground, these vines. And they just slowly, over the years, start encircling this big, massive tree, so that eventually the vine has completely covered the tree. You can't even know that there was an original tree there, because it's now looks like the vine, whatever that tree is. I think they're maybe, I'm not sure what, I'm forgetting now if it's a fig tree that they're related to. And so this is the image that the Buddha used for these tendencies, you could use any number of lists, but just using this list of 5 hindrances, the wanting, the not wanting, aversion, identified, caught up in sleepiness or restlessness or doubt. So this is how wisdom works with the understanding of karma. These tendencies, whatever unwholesome qualities of mind you have noticed, they arise lawfully. They are being fed right now or not fed. How can I become wiser about feeding what is deserving of being fed and starving what is deserving of being starved? And this is how we build the paramis or any of the lists of wholesome qualities of the mind and heart. And this is how we weaken and it ultimately uproot the unwholesome qualities. It's this very resolute and patient sense of responsibility. How I'm paying attention right now, like, am I actually interested in the quality of my mind and heart right now? Because that would be a nice starting point, wouldn't it? I mean, it's amazing that we have a mind and have had a mind. And yet, when we actually, if we could do a statistical analysis of how many mind moments through the course of our waking days, we've actually been interested in the quality of our own mind. I mean, it's got to be minuscule. I mean, it has to be less than 1% of the time of our waking moments that we've actually been curious about what qualities are present in our mind, what qualities are being strengthened or reinforced, what qualities are being weakened. And the thing is, we can do this in real time. It's like while we're talking to somebody, but on retreat, we have the optimal time because things are more simple and there are fewer interactions with other people. And so in the relative quiet and simplicity of retreat time, we can just get interested in, well, and you might just choose one particular quality, like patience, just as an example, or when we'll speak on generosity tomorrow night, and on Wednesday night, Shelley is going to talk about sila, this power of restraint. I know that sounds a little tight when we say the power of restraint, but it's really a beautiful, like, yeah, I could say this to that person and it would really hurt them, but I'm going to keep myself from saying that. I don't need to say that. It isn't really what I want to set in motion. I don't want to be the person who puts somebody in their place because I can. Maybe sometimes we need to say something to somebody that really hurts, and that's the skillful thing to do, but not always. And so it's really nice to be able to, like, feel the power of being able to say something that might really hurt somebody or put them in their place, but realize, you know what? I'm not going to do that. And have that power to restrain ourselves. Just like, we might see something we like, but it's not ours. Well, I'm not going to take that because it's not mine. I could probably cheat on my taxes and get away with it, but I'm not going to do that. I could probably take more than kind of I should in this situation, but I'm not. I'm going to just take what's appropriate to take so that other people can have some. It's like even those of us who are relatively affluent, we actually have money in the bank, for example. Well, a lot of people don't. So this, the quality, the capacity to let go, to be content with a little less, and to appreciate being able to give and feel what that feels like. It's a superpower because, it's sort of like, it's easy to think, well, I don't know how needy I'll be in the future. I might live to be 120. I might need that money. Or, there may be this terrible depression and all my money in the bank might become much less. So I better not give any away. So it's a real power to share and to be generous or to refrain. And in the same way, it's a real power, superpower to learn about cause and effect so that we can really take care of our own mind. Just like a super gardener, when you see somebody who's really put their heart into the garden and the soil just is sort of, it's a thing of beauty when you touch the earth and you see kind of how alive and flourishing the plants are. Well, we can do the same thing in terms of cultivating our own heart. It's really impressive when you're around some of these nuns and monks who have had, optimal conditions to train their heart and mind. And you just see, like, especially for me, I can be a little bit sloppy with language. And so one of the things, because I know that about myself, when I'm around somebody who is well trained, and I want to just state again, this does not mean tight, because a lot of times, it's terribly ironic that, when we think about somebody who's really trained their mind, we just presume that they're tight, like afraid of being bad or something like that. But it's just the opposite. It's when, like I was mentioning, these habits, these hindrances, they're like these hungry beasts. They're impersonal. They're not really me, my anger, my defensiveness, my sloppiness with language. That's not really me, but I'm still responsible for these vortexes, these whirlpools, these tendencies of my mind. And the tendency, because they have their own feedback system, their tendency is just to keep growing. Because when what we do, we become. If we keep doing something, it becomes the tendency of the mind. It hardens into the character, into the personality of the mind. So we do get swept away. We get entrapped and oppressed by these impersonal habits. And especially as we get older, I'm sure that other people now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who are on retreat, I see like these things that I've been a little lax in over the years. It's much harder to turn it around when I've been allowing my mind to go down that pathway. So it's actually appropriate to have some, I don't know if I'd use the word fear, but some wholesome concern about our heart and about what qualities are getting watered and fertilized and what qualities are being weakened. And this, the whole awakening, we get so impressed and enchanted by the idea of full awakening, being one of the awakened ones, the unshakable release of the heart. But it isn't something that you or I will ever do. It's something that happens when the conditions are there. And the primary condition for the beautiful awakening process to do what it does is this purification of our mind, to water or to feed what is deserving of being fed, and to starve, to not water what isn't deserving of being watered. And this is the basic wisdom of cause and effect of karma, that it matters what the mind is dwelling on, how the mind is relating, what the mind is paying attention to. It really matters. So what is my mind doing right now? Not to get tight, but it's really an expression, an active expression of compassion and love. Not just for our own well-being, but for everybody's well-being. Because as I said earlier, this world is simply, naturally, and perfectly the expression of all of our hearts together. What else would make up this world except cumulatively all of our hearts, the qualities in all of our hearts? So whatever terrible greed or hate or ignorance we see in the world, well, that's just what it looks like when all of our hearts are the way that they are. And as I've been saying, the mind, these wholesome qualities, they're really superpowers. So when we're around somebody who's really developed generosity or really developed this ability to not feed unwholesome qualities in their mind, when you interact with them, they have this quality of stability, like they're the earth itself, unshakable in a way. And it doesn't feel tight or contrived in any way. It can be a little intimidating, actually, when we meet someone from our, relatively neurotic, needy, fearful place, and they're in this sort of grounded, earth-like, balanced love. Because the contrast, we really see our own qualities, like the absence, the sort of stability and the absence of neurotic qualities sort of make our own neurotic, unsettled, needy, fearful, doubtful qualities stand out more. But that's exactly what we need to see. We need to see them. We need this little bit of wisdom from our elders that say it's our responsibility, but it isn't personal. So hating ourselves, giving up, none of that helps. None of that is useful. None of that is appropriate. The only thing that's appropriate when one thing or another illuminates unwholesome qualities is to get curious. How are they being fed? How can they be weakened? And same thing when we notice the beautiful qualities in our mind and heart. How are they being fed? How can I keep feeding them? How can I refrain from starving them? And interestingly, you know what feeds the wholesome qualities? Recognizing them. If nothing else, just to go through that list of the 10 paramis, and force yourself to remember how that quality is actually alive in your life, even if it's somewhat feeble. Oh, yeah, that is this quality of resoluteness, or that is this quality of patience, or kindness, or energy, or renunciation, or generosity, or equanimity, or loving kindness. I don't know if that's all 10, but it's most of them. So that we get really good. And then when we're aware that a wholesome quality is there, then it's relatively easy to keep it in mind and to appreciate it. It's different. That's different than taking it personally. There's a way to see something, just like when we see something beautiful in nature, we don't take the sunset personally, or if we see a massive, healthy tree that's just so awe-inspiring, we don't take it personally, but it's still something we can deeply appreciate. And it's the same with the wholesome qualities in our own heart and mind. They can be deeply appreciated, and that's how we feed them. It's like fertilizer. When there's a wholesome quality that feels good and leads to good, and to know that and to feel that and to appreciate that, that cuts the groove deeper for the mind to go in that direction. And just the opposite for an unwholesome quality, recognizing directly, immediately in the present moment that it's unwholesome, which means it's suffering now and it's suffering later. It's tight now and it's tight later. We actually have to, when we're like, let's use the example of being aversive, fearful. Oh, this fear is tight, it's constricting, it's painful. And it sets that emotion down the road. Now it isn't about hating the fear, it's about making that correlation between the fear in the mind and the tightness, the suffering that inevitably is with it. Oh, yeah. You don't get one without the other. When there's fear, there's constriction. When there's this identification with fear, where the mind is identified with the fear. But when there's awareness of fear and knowing it's just this fear being known, there's going to be the constriction of the fear being known, but there's no feeding it. And even the identification can very quickly fall away. And when the fear isn't being fed, we notice it's not very stable. Any of the unwholesome qualities, when we're just seeing them for what they are, unwholesome qualities, they fall away. And this is how we develop bhavana or bhavana, right? cultivating the heart, we're basically taking the teaching on karma, that intention matter, intentional activities matter, how the mind is relating, quality of motivation, it matters. So we're inspired to pay attention. We're inspired to learn how to feed what's deserving of being fed and to starve what's deserving of being starved. We take responsibility for the garden of our own heart. And we need to initially, it might be borrowed faith, but hopefully we all have enough actual experience that we know that this is true. We know that even with my life and this conditioned personality and this set of circumstances that I'm living in, that with enough patience, with enough dedication, I can set in motion something really beautiful. In a way, that's what the story of the Buddha or any of our spiritual ancestors, the saints, the awakened ones, that's the purpose, is they kind of represent, because they're just stories in our mind. We probably don't know these people very well, at least. Maybe you've bumped into a few, if you're lucky, people who sort of are, just there's something palatable being around them that what's left in the heart is, I want what you have. This is what the heart really wants. I want to be like you. I want to cultivate a heart that's like your heart. But it's interesting, when we do have those opportunities, or even the stories of people like the Buddha or whoever has been inspiring for you, those stories are only inspiring because we intuit the truth in our own heart. We don't actually know them. We only know our story about them. So that's what I meant, that we all have some intuition about the capacity of our own heart to be loving, to be wise, and to be free, and to be fearless, even in the messiness of life. And this is really the fruit of this particular parami of wisdom, and really taking care of the mind, cultivating a mind that can see things as they are. And it's really just about valuing present moment awareness, starting over. How many times did you have to start over today? How many times did you notice the mind had wandered, caught up in some drama, and you were willing to carve that groove a little deeper? No, honey, we're going to do this now. We're going to be with the body. We're going to make that particular effort to recognize the present moment. Oh yeah, this is being known. It's like this now. It's just this experience being felt, being known. And to really slowly, little by little, build the momentum of that continuity of present moment awareness, and not afraid to work with the particular training grounds, to realize it's actually helpful to come back to loving kindness practice over and over again, or to come back to the breath as a natural phenomena here in the body, or more generally, just feeling the totality of the body sitting or the body walking, so that we can build that muscle, cut that groove in the mind from distractedness and superficiality and being pushed around by this and then that experience. No, we're just going to come back here. Because when we have that continuity of present moment awareness, insight, the development of insight can't be stopped. It's neither you nor I have to have or do insight, make insight happen. It's really just a matter of building the momentum of present moment awareness. A mind that has a lot of present moment awareness momentum, as the Buddha says, it sees things just as they are. It sees the changing nature. It sees the unsatisfactory nature, that grasping doesn't make sense. It sees the impersonal nature. It sees the escape, which is the letting go of any dependence on sense experience. And then actually, it's only then we know how to relate to sense experience, when the heart isn't dependent on it, isn't trying to get something from sense experience. And this is the whole development of wisdom in a nutshell. Finding the causes to build the momentum of the continuity of present moment awareness, stabilizing that present moment awareness, falling in love with that stable balance, seeing things as they are. Everything takes care of itself from there. So I'll leave it here for tonight. Time to do a little walking or movement practice perhaps. And then we'll come back at 8:30, do a little chanting, have a relatively short sit, and end at 9 p.m. So hopefully you have time to join in for the last set. Thanks for listening, everyone, and hope to see you in a little bit.